BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, and on Wednesdays this year I've been doing a regular segment about the Axeman of New Orleans, an unidentified serial killer who operated in the early part of the 20th century. However, I was planning on having this week as the concluding episode, but last week's episode I thought tied everything together really well, and all of the statements that I would have made for the conclusion have been shared in the final episode, which is part of a playlist on the Axeman of New Orleans, and the final episode is called The Axeman of New Orleans, The Theory, where I'm exploring some comments that were made in the book by Miriam C. Davis about the case, and it's her theory to be precise, but I more or less shared all of my concluding thoughts on that case as well, and next week on the channel I will be talking about the Phantom Killer and getting back to that particular mystery. However, I also wanted to use this as an opportunity to respond to some of the comments that you guys had left on some older episodes that I had about the Darlie Routier case, as well as talking about the development of the channel and some new things that are going to be coming out here on Black Box Online Radio. In the past, True Crime Talk Radio was a segment where many different true crime subjects were explored, and I'd like to begin with the Darlie Routier case. Back in the early part of 2022, in January to be precise, I did 3 episodes on Darlie Routier, as well as one possible connection that this case could have to the serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells, and those were all available here on Black Box Online Radio, particularly the response to the Forensic Files episode about Darlie Routier, because that is how I first learned about her. It wasn't the television show, but the Forensic Files podcast. And to give us an introduction, I'm going to go over to juveniles.com, which is trying to recreate the timeline and what happened to Darlie Routier and the double homicide that ended the lives of her children. On June 6th of 1996, Darren Routier, Darlie's husband, reported he was asleep in the upstairs bedroom when he was suddenly awakened. Darlie was sleeping on the couch in the family room. Devin, age 6, and Damon, age 5, were sleeping on the floor in the family room, in front of the television. Police would later testify that upon arriving at the scene, the television was still on. According to the statement Darren gave to the police, he woke up because he heard a noise, and then Darlie screaming loudly. He ran down the stairs and went into the living room. He spotted Devin on the floor, and the coffee table flipped over. He went to Devin and knelt down to investigate further. Darren testified at the trial that he came down the stairs, and Darlie went straight to the phone in the kitchen and to the kitchen sink to get towels. The timeline is as follows. At 2:30 a.m., Darlie Routier called 911 and began screaming that somebody came in. She went on to tell the dispatcher that she and her children had been stabbed, and based on the 911 transcript, Darren's voice is heard at 30 seconds into the call. At the 55-second mark, Darlie asked frantically, "Oh my God, what did we do?" The dispatcher did not respond because she was calling for assistance on the radio. Darren testified that upon discovering Devin with gashes in his chest, he began to perform CPR. Darren explained that Darlie was running back and forth from the kitchen over to Damon, and then she came over to Devin. When asked what she was doing, she responded, "Getting towels," and describing her as trying to stop the bleeding. Officer Waddell, who was 1.9 miles away from the Routier home on 5801 Eagle Drive, and Lieutenant Whaling, who was 3.1 miles from the home, both received the call about the emergency and responded. Paramedics were also alerted. This is confirmed through the testimony. At 2:31 a.m., 1 minute and 7 seconds into the 911 call, Darlie is heard talking to Damon. She says, "Damon, hold on, honey." She is heard speaking to Damon 1 minute and 48 seconds into the call. At 2:32 a.m., at 2:32 a.m., she said, "Hold on, honey," to Darren. In the testimony, Aaron depicted the arrival of the first officer, David Waddell, on the scene. Darren and Waddell gave slightly different accounts in what happened. 2 children would die from their injuries, but what is odd about the case is that a sock with Devin and Damon's blood was found several houses away. It was on the ground near a trash can. There was no blood trail near the sock. If Darlie placed it there, as the prosecution contended, she had to have done it after the boys were fatally injured, but before she slashed her own neck. She would have had to have done this in bare feet, or else she had to have taken even more time upon arriving back at home to remove her shoes. If bare feet, she would have taken longer to deposit the sock. And I'm going to stop right there, because Darlie Routier was convicted for the murders of her 2 children, and she is currently on death row. And recently, I watched the episode of Criminally Listed about her. It's actually called 5 People on Death Row Who May Be Innocent, and this was another reason why I wanted to respond to the comments that you guys have left about the Darlie Routier case, because there were a lot of people that are saying that she is innocent, and a lot of people that are saying that she is guilty. And on the episode of Criminally Listed, a channel which I do not watch nearly enough, I used to watch it all the time, I was one of the earliest subscribers to that channel when it was just starting out, but they're talking about how it has only the children's blood but not her blood, and furthermore, not completely covered in blood. It's not completely doused in the blood. If she had wanted to stage something to make it look like an intruder had done it, why not put more blood on it? And, I mean, that's a question that perhaps will be answered later on in the episode. And some of the points that have been shared from forensic files, which perhaps is almost everybody's go-to piece of information for this case, aside from the transcripts, is that a window was cut open. By a window, we mean the screen. Like a window screen was cut. And forensic files more or less says that Darlie Routier was caught for 2 specific reasons. The first one is that the window was cut with the bread knife from her butcher's block. And they said on Criminally Listed that it was the butter knife. I don't quite think that's true. I mean, a bread knife is going to be just a little bit sharper and more practical, and that's the whole case, that it's a bread knife, one that has some sharp things, but not quite a serrated edge, but it has those little grooves in it. You guys know what I'm talking about. And that is what was used to cut the screen on Darlie Routier's home. But she then placed the bread knife back in the butcher's block and didn't think that anyone wouldn't look at it. So then they found the fiberglass particles from the screen on the bread knife, and that suggested that the entire thing was staged by someone in the house. I mean, how else would some type of outside intruder? Also, a motive was very questionable. This home invader who was attacking Darlie and the children had some type of reason to go after them, but what would it be? It didn't appear to be a robbery, and it didn't quite appear as to why they should be attacked in the first place. It seemed like somewhat of a senseless crime. So that's all beginning to raise some particular questions. Then a video shows up after the funeral of one of the children, and it was a funeral memorial service turned birthday party where Darlie was seen smiling and spraying silly string. Now, one point where I completely agree with the commenters on Criminally Listed was that should not have been viewed as evidence either way. That is not evidence of someone's guilt or innocence. Spraying silly string at a memorial service, because what I think is clear as day is that it was a memorial service turned birthday party, and that the prosecution took very cherry-picked pieces of the media, and they tried to make it look like Darlie was celebrating and laughing and making fun of the situation. But it was meant to recreate a child's birthday party, and they said there were numerous video clips of her grieving at the memorial service that happened just before the silly string incident. And I believe that no matter what, no matter whether you think she's guilty or innocent, I believe that. So just because someone is then choosing to celebrate a kid's birthday party post-mortem, I don't think that's significant of guilt or innocence, and it has nothing to do with the forensics. So, I'd like to get to your questions and comments now about Darlie Routier and the murder of her 2 children from 1996. Lucy K. writes, "All these people that say there is physical evidence to back up the Darlie Routier case are mistaken. Watch the show The Last Offense. It debunked all of the supposed evidence, and this was done by experts. They said that it could have happened exactly the way she said and most likely did. She was convicted based on the stupid silly string incident. This is the worst nightmare I can think of for a person. She will be put to death, and I don't believe there is enough evidence. In addition, the parents spent more on the funeral than they got from the life insurance." And that was something that was shared on Criminally Listed, that the 2 children were insured, but they only received $10,000 as compensation from the insurance, and the funerals cost $14,000. So, that was something that has been shared publicly, although I haven't exactly verified that via documents. "She will be put to death, and I don't believe there is nearly enough evidence. In addition, the parents spent more on the funeral than they got from the life insurance. Lastly, the stupid silly string video was edited. She almost passed out, so distraught right before that. Everyone else was spraying silly string as well. This should not be allowed as evidence. It proves nothing. None of us have been through something so tragic, and there is no correct way to act. Most people got into survival mode, and allow oneself to enjoy a brief moment of joy does not make them a killer." About the silly string, I agree, but I also support the idea that Darlie Routier was guilty, because I didn't recognize the name of this episode, The Last Offense, so what I did was, I was just looking for it on YouTube, and I found that it's actually the name of the ABC special that was done about Darlie Routier, and I had watched it in the past. But a big challenge to all of the people who say that the forensic evidence does not suggest that Darlie Routier is guilty, and that suggests that she's innocent, they almost always overlook the blood evidence, because this is how Forensic Files chose to present it to the general public, that the majority of the droplets in Darlie Routier's home fell in near-perfect circles, and for that to happen, someone needs to be standing relatively still and allowing the blood droplets to fall. If she had been running through the house or in a confrontation with an attacker, the circles would have been elongated, or they would have had a tail at the end, almost like a tadpole has one of those tails. Again, someone is moving continuously as the droplets are falling. The prosecution also put forward the theory that Darlie Routier cut herself over the kitchen sink, and that's why there was a large collection of micro droplets and larger droplets falling on top of other droplets, because that was the point of insertion for the knife. But I'd like to go to one comment from Bathsheba. "The investigators in this case were incompetent. The bread knife did not cut the screen and has no connection to the case. I believe her new investigators can prove this in her final appeal. The killer cut the screen with his own pocket knife and folding knife, which he also used to inflict small superficial cuts to Damon and her youngest son's shoulder. He grabbed the butcher knife to finish Damon off, kill Devon and cut Darlie's throat, and stab her in the forearm, which she raised to protect. Classic defense wound. The silly string tape just highlights how stupid this jury was. It should never have been allowed in the trial, and it has nothing to do with the murder." Well, I'm not exactly sure the source that is being used to demonstrate that the bread knife did not contain fiberglass particles, because that's the entire piece of the prosecution. And furthermore, I would like to know, how does this person know that the killer used a pocket knife if the suspect is an unidentified individual whom we can't even name, and yet you know that he used a pocket knife to cut the window? I mean, where are you getting this stuff from? And it's odd because that person did not cite a source. And the next comment comes to us from Kodak Khan Shihai. When it comes to motive, all the circumstantial evidence, and the unclear mix-up stories, it does point to Darlie. Yet there are many times when people have extremely difficult reactions to situations, and they display some signs of guilt without being guilty. However, with all of the psychological aspects pushed aside, the forensic evidence was extremely clear that there never was anybody else in the house. It was extremely clear to the Dallas investigator, hence why he was called a psychic, and psychic is written in quotation marks. You can take that as you will. Okay, here is something, though, that I learned on the show Meet, Marry, Murder, one that was hosted by Michelle Trachtenberg, when they said, when somebody is making a fake 911 call, they tend to be consistently frantic. And they're just like, oh my god, this happened, that happened, and someone came out of the house, and then they start crying, and they start wailing. But what is actually more suggestive of innocence is when there are gaps in the frantic behavior, because the consistently frantic talking, the constantly raising one's voice, the constantly screaming, all of that is suggestive of guilt, because it's just trying to make people think about the intensity of the situation. And that's what people expect, though, to happen. But if someone is actually having intervals where they calm down for a little bit, that can be a sign of innocence. I mean, I just wanted to share that. It's an interpretive statement. You can take it for what you will. But, I mean, with this comment here, if there was a physical intruder, and just this man that attacked Darlie and the children, and I believe he was a Caucasian male who was wearing a black baseball cap, and that's all she was able to share. If he did indeed attack her, where is the physical evidence? CRW writes, I have always believed she was innocent. I think it's scary that she's on death row. Anyone who hears the evidence has questions as to how she is on death row. Not exactly. I know how she's on death row. It's, the bread knife, the blood droplets, the collection of blood by the sink, and one of the, perhaps, more interesting aspects of this particular case is that Darlie Routier was photographed in the hospital with a massive bruise on her arm, and also, even criminally stated that one of the reasons why she survived is because she was wearing a necklace, and I guess that blocked the blade of the knife, in their opinion, and that the necklace was embedded so deeply that it had to be surgically removed. I even said this in the first episode that I did about Darlie Routier on True Crime Talk Radio, and T. Sully responded by saying, the only way to learn the Darlie Routier case is to read the transcripts and appeals. The defense and the family have polluted the media with misinformation that they keep repeating. And for starters, that was a response to a post that I had read off on the air from the website darliefacts.com, and T. Sully will call that out later on. Number 1. Darlie's necklace wasn't embedded in her neck and came off when the technicians removed her in the ER. Read registered nurse Jody Fitt's testimony. He witnessed it. The next one is, number 2. The bruising on her right arm, according to the testimony of all medical personnel that treated her, wasn't present during her hospital stay, nor was the redness, swelling, or did she complain of anything in that area. It was found that the bruising was fresh, 24 to 48 hours old, and being that it was photographed on June 10th, it can't have been connected to the crime on June 6th of 1996. And yes, the alternative explanation about how she got such a large bruise on her arm is that it came from an IV, and I actually believe that, just knowing some people who've had similar experiences in the hospital, that the bruise came from the IV. Darlie Facts is run by the defense team, and any commentary they put forward was decided long ago. There remains no evidence of any intruder. All blood, fingerprints, DNA, and footprints have been accounted for, and no evidence connecting Darren to the murders. Overwhelmingly evidence against Darlie, including her many lies. She is 100% guilty. And T. Sully also responded to someone who said that Darlie's children may have been murdered by the serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells, saying that Tommy Lynn Sells was in prison at the time. And Tommy Lynn Sells was a serial killer who was known as the coast-to-coast killer, the cross-country killer, and even the brutal Texan. I have an episode about him on this channel, and you can like, subscribe, follow on Facebook, Instagram, and also go over to buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. There's a link to that in the description box. If you'd like to support the show, and anybody who makes a donation or contribution will get a shout out on Zodiac Mondays. But Tommy Lynn Sells was incarcerated from 1995 to 1997, and the reason why he becomes a suspect in the Routier case, albeit a flimsy one, is because there was a woman named Julie Rhea Harper who had a very similar experience. Her child was murdered, and Tommy Lynn Sells later on confessed to committing a crime in that area. A very general confession, but Julie Rhea Harper was exonerated because, as I said, Tommy Lynn Sells was a cross-country killer who committed a similar crime to the Routier case, and it led to the exoneration of one person. However, he was behind bars at the time, so almost certainly he was not the perpetrator. But what do you think? Do you have any additional comments about Darlie Routier's guilt or innocence? Which ones do you side with? Do you side with Darlie Routier actually telling the truth, and she just experienced perhaps the absolute worst situation in the world? 2 children murdered, and an attacker got away with it, and she ended up on death row? Or do you agree with the comment that stated that all the evidence has actually been accounted for, and there's just misinformation going out by the defense? Now, in the future on this channel, switching gears a little bit, as I said, I'm going to be exploring the Phantom Killer mystery, because I did a series about that earlier on the show during the perhaps late summer of 2022, but it was very choppy. Some of it's done on video where I appear on camera, some of it's done in the podcast recordings. What I wanted to do was I wanted to go back and redo it all in the same way, and I'm going to be looking at some of the sources that I've covered in the past, particularly the biography of Lone Wolf Gonzalez, who was an investigator in the Phantom Killer mystery, the unidentified serial killer from 1946. And after that, there are several other cases that I would like to get back to on the channel. One of them is the story of Mary Pinchot Meyer, who was the subject of the podcast Murder on the Towpath, which it was done by Soledad O'Brien. And the reason why this case is so famous is because Mary Pinchot Meyer was the wife of Cord Meyer, who was a high-ranking CIA official, and there are all types of questions that can be raised. Was she targeted because of an opportunistic homicide, or was she targeted because of a CIA-related reason and she was meant to have kept quiet? And also, the podcast Murder on the Towpath is really going to focus in on race-related issues, and I have no comment at all on that. And I really want to separate that stuff out and look at the things that are actually talking about the investigation of this particular crime, because a black man was accused of the murder of Mary Pinchot Meyer, and he's in the vicinity of the crime, not like right up against the body, but in the vicinity of where she was murdered in Washington, D.C. The Canal Towpath is where it gets its name. And that podcast is just going to look at, oh, they were being racist. They zoned in on a black man. They shouldn't have done that. And I just want to cut all that stuff out and go right to the forensics or some of the possible theorizing involving the CIA. Make no mistake, I'm open to talking about theories and hypotheses and even some type of far-out theory, but I just want to get away from some of the things that I think are just used as flash and used as sensationalism to pull people in with regards specifically to race-related issues. So look out for some new episodes on the channel as I respond to that one in the future. And I know that this might not be the most popular idea in the world, but for a while I've been meaning to get back to the Atlanta Monster podcast and go through the story on just that, the Atlanta child murders in Wayne Williams, because that's another very, very saddening story. And there were a bunch of child murders that took place in Atlanta, and Wayne Williams was most likely a killer, but perhaps he didn't do all of them. And I've done one response to the Atlanta Monster podcast, and that was on the DC Sniper. It's called Monster, the DC Sniper story, talking about John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. And I grew up in West Virginia, and my part of West Virginia is actually relatively close to Washington, D.C., and I lived through the DC Sniper attacks. And even in West Virginia, we had to be on the lookout for the DC Sniper, and we had protocols and all of that. And I responded to one of the movies that was done about the DC Sniper, but there's one called Blue Caprice that was done with Isaiah Washington. The Chevy Caprice was the type of car the snipers had. That is one that I would like to watch in the future, and I'm just going to be doing more of that in the near future if I can, responding to movies that have been done about true crime cases, because I was talking recently about the serial killer Albert Fish, and I watched a movie about him and responded to it on this channel in 2020. The movie was called The Gray Man, and I would like to watch the next one. I believe the other movie they made about him is just simply called Albert Fish. Terrible serial killer, cannibalistic serial killer, but I find that I'm just curious about how they choose to portray a serial killer in a documentary and then show him in a crime drama. And the same is true for any of these other true crime stories. That's just, what are the true crime reporters saying, and what are the film directors saying, what are the screenwriters saying, and just comparing and contrasting films with the actual stories. So please look out for some of those things, and as I said, you can like and subscribe, follow along with all of these events. I should point out that Monster also has a series on the Zodiac killer, and those three are available on YouTube. One about the DC Sniper, one about Wayne Williams, the Atlanta child murderer, and one about the Zodiac. And this is something that is kind of loosely Zodiac related. I've been meaning to go through the book Napa Valley Lawmen and Outlaws, and I've talked about it before on the channel, because Chapter 16 is devoted to Harold K. Snook, who is a Zodiac killer suspect, and I have read that previously because it was posted on Google Books, but I would like to do something larger where I respond to the true crime aspects of just the entirety of the book. I want to respond to the whole book, Napa Valley Lawmen and Outlaws, but Hal Snook is a very odd Zodiac killer suspect because he is the prime suspect in the hoax theory, which is put forward by Thomas Henry Horan, and he accuses this man of writing the Zodiac letters but not committing all of the murders. So I would like to just see what pieces of information are shared about Napa Valley Lawmen, as well as the outlaw aspect of it, and I would love to do a book discussion on that one. Mostly just trying to find out the investigative tactics that are used, and even in terms of investigations, I was watching the channel Unsolved No More, which is hosted by Ken Maines, who was made famous by the History Channel's Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, and he has a book out of the same name, Unsolved No More, and I would love to read his book solely for the purpose of trying to find out, how do people think in terms of investigations? Like, how do people think when they're analyzing these types of true crime cases? So there's a lot to look forward here on this channel, and for you guys who tune into the Zodiac episodes, I've been going through the book Exposed by Mark Hewitt, and I'm also going to go through the book The Unabomber, The Zodiac by Douglas Oswell. Both of these books will identify Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, as being the Zodiac killer. And if you want to listen to my responses, you can go through the Zodiac news reports for November and December of 2022. Douglas Oswell is also the author of A Fantasia for Two Lutes, A Christmas Tale, and I'm going to be doing a December episode about that one for the Anything Goes Friday segment. So there's a lot to discuss here on this channel, and as I said, you can like, subscribe, visit BuyMeACoffee.com, and share some other things about true crime cases, although the podcast is going in a lot of different directions, and that's good. That's good. I've always wanted this channel to talk about different subjects. I never wanted to do anything one note. I wouldn't mind doing a couple regular segments, and even just the Monday show is about the Zodiac, the Wednesday show is about a different topic, and it goes on for years and years. I've been doing the Zodiac thing for several years now, and one day, I just hope that we will have some ability to say that the case has been closed, the case has been solved, and move on to something else. Before the Wednesday show, there are many other unsolved cases out there, and on this year I've talked about the Long Island serial killer, the Phantom Killer, and the Axeman of New Orleans. Perhaps a new serial killer mystery will come about. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode and all the stuff about Darlie Routier, as well as the upcoming events on the channel. Much appreciated to all of you, and one more time, you can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNet88 over on Instagram, and I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.